Hello, here we are again, raking up the rural past. Still, rural life as it was died so fast after the last World War compared to the modern techno-bucolic existence, or whatever you call it nowadays. An awful lot of simple knowledge was lost that everybody used to have. And sometimes it comes in useful, as for instance in the last war, because I came on leave in 1940 and I went to stay with some friends in the country. And I went fishing in the lake, and I brought the lady back some eels. She was absolutely delighted. She says, "At last you brought some fish fit to eat. We really need those now rationing has started." I said, "Right, I will set you up as an eel catcher. First of all, you need a ring. Nowadays, you'd probably make that out of heavy fencing wire. We used to make it simply by twisting around a hazel stick while it was still green immediately after it had been cut. And then you want a bran sack. A bran sack was a loose, light sack that we used for putting bran in. Nowadays, once again, there's probably a better substitute in the modern plastic open sacks that are used for potatoes. And then you want to take your needle and thread. We use a sack needle. Those are the ones we used to have on the farm for sewing up the potato sacks. If you can't get that nowadays, you probably can get a carpet needle. Anyway, ideally a sack needle. Turn the sack inside out and then start sewing the ring into it. That's easy enough. See. All the way around, continue until it's finished, and then turn the sack back the other way out again. And you will have a sack with a ring in the top. And this you attach some string in 3 places, 120 degrees apart, thus joined, exactly like a pan on an old-fashioned scales. And now you need a brick. And you put the brick in at the bottom of the sack. That acts as a weight to let it sink. And then you put the bait in. I won't do that now because it's a fairly disgusting process. If we had been killing and drawing chickens for dinner, we used to use chicken's guts, or in the same circumstances if we had rabbit's guts, or sometimes just a piece of slightly high herring or kipper, which happened to have gone too far. And then when that's in on top, you start to put straw in. And you fill this thing up with straw, pressing it down well, until the whole sack is about 2/3 full of straw, well pressed down. And then on the end of that, you put a nice long line, which will enable you to throw it a good way out into the lake, or into a slack part of the river, preferably between 2 weed beds. What you do is you lay coils of that line out on the bank so they'll undo easily without catching, and then you swing this out and hurl it. I won't hurl it very far now, but you hurl it out into the river, and then you pull it tight. That's the important thing. You pull it tight, because that will lift that top. So if I let that go, it closes down, but if I pull that up tight, fasten it to a peg on the bank, then it will keep that open. Nicely open. So, now, the important thing about an eel is that he's got first of all, he likes a bit of dead flesh. Secondly, he's got a terrific sense of smell. I suppose in the water, it's really sense of taste. Same thing. I once saw an eel find a piece of dead fish. The dead fish was about there in the river, and I was looking at it, and downstream I saw a moving shape, and I saw a big eel, and he was coming up, and he's quartering his way up the river like this, exactly like a spaniel, working his way up, tasting the current as a spaniel smells the air, until he got up there to where the thing was. When he goes in, he'll work his way right the way through that straw, and that saves you from catching any other fish, because they won't find their way through the straw. The eel will do so without the faintest difficulty, and what's more, once he's in it, it'll take him quite a while to turn round and come out. That's the trick of it, you see. So you give them just about time. One eel will be followed by another, and so on. And if you've got it right, and it's slightly thundery night, perhaps when they seem to like to feed most, we used to set the thing at before we went to bed, and then get up just at dawn to get it out. And when you get it out, you want to be very careful, because you don't want to give them any warning of interference. You tighten this gently, and then we used to have a close prop, because we'd be reaching out. You see, I haven't thrown this very far now, but we would be reaching out with a long close prop, and the moment we could get it in there like that, we set it and then up onto the bank, giving him absolutely no time to get out of it. Tip the whole thing out, and in the straw will be eels, and they'll immediately make for the bank very quickly, so you have to catch them. That's not very easy, but we used to use a little stick like we use for catching snakes. Shove it down on them, you can catch them, and you will go home with a nice wet sack full of quite a lot of eels. And when I came back at the end of the war, I said to this lady, "How'd you get on with the eels?" She said, "Marvellous. I've been supplying everybody in the district with eels right through rationing. What's more," she said, "I've learned how to smoke them. And I've been supplying smoked eels." She turned the little back privy of this cottage, the unused earth privy, into a smoker. Nothing better, unless it's a big old refrigerator. So that's how you catch eels. You want a sack and a ring and a brick. Only once in the last 20 years have I seen a dipper in Dorset. And then just round a corner, I thought, and on a stream, a silty chalk stream, the way you wouldn't expect to see it, not the stony mountain moorland streams to which the dipper belongs. And yet, this last year, a lady said to us, "The dipper's nested on our farm once or twice in the last few years." And we said, "Oh yes?" And she said, "Yes." We said, "Do give us a ring if it turns up again." And she did. She rang up and said, "The dipper's back." So we went to look. And it was very interesting, you see. This is where the chalk hills drop into the vale. And here at this farm, a little stream runs down, which originates in the chalk hill just a bit further up. And if you approach the village from the other side, coming down to where that farm is, you find some interesting things. First of all, if you check there for a moment, one of the other houses of the hamlet has that round steel plate outside the door of the barn. Do you see it? Well, that means one thing and one thing only, which is the wheelwright lived there. And that's where you used to put the iron tires on the cart and trap wheels. Certainly there was a wheelwright there. Just below his place, or the place that once was his, is the bridge, and down to this comes the little chalk stream. It's originated in the springs just a little bit farther up the hill. Perhaps some of you know it, the famous Zigzag Hill. And as you can see, it's already a sulky, silty little stream that's dropping its silt and travelling slowly. And you wouldn't expect to be a dipper's habitat, but when you look the other side of the bridge, you see that something has happened. Sometime, probably generations ago, somebody dammed up the water just at those farm buildings and produced a little lake. It looks like a mill head, and indeed it is a mill head, because there was a little tiny corn mill at this farm which was run by a member of the family. In fact, it was a family settlement. A lot of these hamlets were a farmer and a relative of his who was the miller, and another relative living just at the other side of the pond who was a wheelwright and made the carts. And the geography of this place is very important. You see, the water is held up by a dam. There's a little leak over there where it drops away if it ever should rise too high. And when you come to here, on my left now, you're looking at a mill wheel. And further on, there's another spill that drops out of the right-hand corner there, runs down into a hole, and then runs right under the mill and disappears out the other side. That's where it falls, you see, down into the hole behind the mill. And there's quite a waterfall. And waterfalls are of great interest to dippers. And they're not all that common here. When you walk round down round the dam, you find that the mill wheel is an overshot wheel. That is to say, the water hit it at the top and pushed it round anti-clockwise, so to speak, instead of it catching it underneath and putting it thing. And that the drop here is enormous. It's about an 11-foot drop. There's the remains of the overshot wheel, just a series of long buckets, you see, which fills each in turn as the water comes into it from the top and turns it. Dead now for a long time, this wheel. And incidentally, in it at this moment, in the remains of one of the buckets, there's a nest of another creature, a wagtail. Always find wagtails around the water. They live on the hatching water flies very largely through the summer, and this one's found its nesting place actually inside the wheel. So all those elaborate arrangements, the spills and the tunnel under the middle of that sort of thing, all appear at the mouth of this tunnel here and disappear where the stream is here reconstituted, but of quite a different character than it was above. Above, it was just tooling along. Here, with other springs still running into it, it's a brisk and bright stream having all the force of the 11-foot drop in it. And it rushes downstream, clearing the stones over which it runs, getting rid of its silt, and it doesn't look at all like most of the streams in this district. If you go just over a quarter of a mile further down, you'll come to a point, again where there's a little leak into the thing, where the silt begins to drop again. The force of that fall is spent, and the stream is beginning to slow up again. And downstream it will have its other, more Dorset character. But this will show you, this is interesting actually from the point of view of the dipper, because it shows you how early in the year it is. The catkins are already out, but the blackthorn isn't, although the buds are swelling. So this is about the limit of a microhabitat, as naturalists would say. Quite honestly, it's a little bit of Dorset which was turned into a little bit of Devonshire by the arrangements that were made for that mill, and it produced just this stretch. If you look up there, you can see where the farm is, where we were a minute ago. So just down from the farm to this footbridge in between is a little bit of something which looks exactly like one of the moorland streams, the stony moorland streams that the dippers favour. The water runs bright, it breaks over the stream, there isn't any silt, and there's an abundance of stones because there have been buildings here so long. Buildings have broken down and been built up again, and to give it a sort of series of rocks that it can run over. It changes all the time, of course. On all these streams you can see places where once upon a time there was a big spring used to come in. There's an outflow there, you see, with a stone beam out of it. It used to carry a lot of water into the stream, and then that spring dried up and the thing shifted itself, and it came in a little higher or a little lower. But all the way, we can see what we now realise is a perfectly good dipper's reach. And interestingly enough, the only other bird that was making itself evident on that particular cold morning, very early in the year, is that little jenny wren. And the jenny wren, in fact, is the dipper's only other relative in Britain. The only two members of that family that exist in Great Britain are little jenny wren, that everybody knows, or the dipper, that usually only the people living alongside the mountain and moorland streams see, and we never expected to. Now, the reason why a dipper could be expected to be nesting already at this time of the year, they seem to nest miles earlier than the rest of Brit birds, is also very interesting and part of the story, because they feed on water insects. And whereas all the insects of the land are subject to frost and snow and have to hide away, the water insects, particularly in chalk stream water, which keeps a constant temperature, go on being active all the way through the winter. So a bird which lives on the water insects can get active and find food for its young much earlier in the year. And here's my bird friend, David Boag, and he's just actually checking on that. Look, pick up one of those stones, shift one of those stones, and there's a mass of insects active. Weeks earlier than most of the insects were needed to feed the other birds' young are. Under that little rock, for instance, is covered with little leeches. So back up to the farm. Interesting, old-fashioned place. Look at that sink. Actually hacked out of a solid piece of stone. You see there where it ran out at the end. Now, nothing could have been nicer than this setup, actually, because it was very early in the year and very cold for bird watching, but we actually found that we could bird watch from indoors, because if we went into the little mill, there was a window downstream which took us all the way. At the back there was a window that took us to the spillway at the back, and alongside, just below the little tunnel bridge, there was a chicken house into which David had just clambered with his camera. So this was our bad weather bird watching hide. First time I ever had the luxury of being able to do it this way. Now from here on the front of the mill, I can look down the stream where the water flows right down to the little bridge where the Dipper's Reach finishes, and 50 yards below me, in the chicken house, hidden behind a piece of carpet with 2 or 3 spy holes cut in it, is Dave. There's a couple of wild duck there. And if we watch, and there's the dipper. Do you see in the middle of the stream, that white-breasted bird? Look, it's flying up onto that pipe, to perch over the thing like that. Right there. That's the best view of it that I can get from here, but it's just the view we were looking for. There is a dipper here. In fact, there's a pair of dippers here. And without question, they're nesting. Now, that's better. You see now from where he is, he can really see this thing. You can also see why it's called a dipper. I don't know why it does it. And if you watch carefully, you sometimes see its eyes flick white. As he dips, you see his eyes flick white. That's because he's got 2 special waterproof eye lids, which he runs over his eyes when he's under the water, because the dipper does actually walk under the water. Walking on the water is always supposed to be a miracle. But for a bird that weighs practically nothing at all to walk under the water is quite extraordinary. But he has a special trick of doing it. What he does is to set his wings at a particular level, like a paravane or a kite, and walk under the water, always upstream, using the power of the water on the slope of his wings to keep his body, which weighs almost nothing, right down at the bottom. And that's why the dipper has to be in sharp water. And look what's on the pipe now. I was hoping that Dave would get that, and he did. What we also hoped for, but we didn't get, too much to hope for perhaps, is the dipper and the kingfisher sitting on the pipe at the same time. Now, he's not nesting yet, or he'd be carrying that back home to the nest. He's feeding himself and getting ready for his later time. And now, while we wait for the next thing to happen, have a look at this. In the lower part of the mill, right alongside the back window, when we're going to look out onto the spillway at the back, is a lathe. A great big heavy lathe. And alongside it, some wheel hubs. You see. And by connecting up that belt to the running mill, the wheelwright could come in here and he can borrow power from the miller in order to be able to turn the big hubs of the carts and the wagons. The only thing in those days for which he needed power. There's another one that was lying there. I expect that was an old one that he brought up here as a pattern to copy. So there was the farmer brother on one side and the miller brother next door to him, and from the other side of the pond came the wheelwright brother with his arrangements to borrow power from the mill for the one job that he couldn't do without it. Very interdependent little community. And now we know that there's something happening in the back spill, and these days, some little while later, Dave joins me inside. I remain at the front window, trying to watch the dippers at their feeding, and he's setting himself up, looking into that place where the waterfall falls in behind the mill, because that's where the dipper's nest is. And the lady was quite right. We found what she promised us. The water comes tumbling in, and there's the dipper entering the nest. You see, it's an extraordinary nest. It's got a roof over it. And anybody who habitually nests in the neighborhood of waterfalls is likely to need a nest, need a roof. See, there's a moss roof, and there she slips up to feed her young. But why does she nest in places like that? In the meanwhile, they're feeding downstream, now they've got young, and I'm spying from the front because they come whizzing up, straight upstream and disappear past me. And if I shout quickly to Dave, he's just in time to catch them as they arrive. So I'm spying for him. And the other thing we discovered this year that I didn't know before, which was absolutely fascinating, was that the reason why they nest right over the water like that, and even over a waterfall, is that young dippers don't fly from the nest. We discovered this year that they just fall out of the nest into the water. And then they learn to fish and walk about in the water with their parents like that. And then they learn to fly later on away from the water, after they're quite a long while out of the nest. So there it was, a little micro-habitat that brought bird you'd expect to see in Devonshire right into Dorset, a quarter of a mile of different country. I've been longing to see that in our county, and I finally did. And now I'll do me practice.
If you enjoyed this program, please subscribe and don't forget to click on the bell if you want to be notified when more videos are available. And if you would like to buy the complete Old Country series of 60 programs, please go to the link in the description below.